Is it good now?
Yeah, we can see you better now, so don't worry. Thanks
Okay.
very much.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think we have some attendees filing in. So maybe I'll hold briefly for a few minutes to give some people time to walk in from their early morning or their late afternoon. All right. We can go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. My name is Zoe Jefflin. I'm with IUCN's Climate Change and Energy Transition team. Thank you so much for joining us today for our fifth NAbSA Dialogue, a series that we started under the Partnering for Climate Initiative, funded and financed and supported by Global Affairs Canada. So we're delighted to have our speakers today focusing on green infrastructure for urban resilience, with a specific angle towards water resource management and watersheds, because that's a very key topic when it comes to urban resilience, and obviously contextualizing this under the context of nature-based solutions for climate adaptation. So thank you again for joining us, and just a few quick reminders as we continue moving forward with the webinar. If you have any comments, reactions, any relevant links that you'd like to share with us and other participants in the webinar, please go ahead and share them within the chat. There should be a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. It helps us if you have any specific questions for a particular speaker to indicate that in your question. Otherwise, we'll direct the question to all of the panelists. If you're joining us and you are a native French speaker or you prefer to listen to this webinar in French, we do have live translation. You should be able to choose that option at the bottom of your screen. There's a little icon that matches the one you see here that should lead you to interpretation. If you just click the French or the English button, we have two channels that are live to accommodate the language of your preference. We are recording this session, including the French channel, and we will be distributing the recordings and the PowerPoints and any useful materials that are shared within this webinar after the session. So first of all, I wanted to say, so obviously the Climate Change and Energy Transition team, we are here under the project of NAbSA. That is a project that helps, that supports the Partnering for Climate community and the 19 Partnering for Climate projects that are doing work on the ground with technical backstopping and capacity building services to ultimately improve climate resilience and reduce poverty for vulnerable communities in Sub-Saharan Africa. The Partnering for Climate initiative is in about 22 countries. And the one we're actually welcoming today is one of the only ones that's in urban landscapes. So we're happy to have them and share this kind of unique experience in the Partnering for Climate world. So I will go ahead and start the session by just inviting my colleague Tony Nello from IUCN's climate or urban team. Apologies, not climate team. So Tony is a French economist residing in Costa Rica since 2013, and he works for IUCN since about 2017. Since 2022, Tony has served as program coordinator for cities in IUCN, supporting multiple subnational governments in their efforts to establish their biodiversity baselines and access and assess ecosystem services generated by urban nature-based solutions, developing strategic relationships and project portfolio development. Before getting involved with IUCN, Tony worked with local international NGOs in the field of energy efficiency, business model and business plan development, carbon finance, and organic agriculture. Tony speaks French, English, and Spanish, and after graduating with a Bachelor's of Economics in Caen University in France, Tony joined the 3A Business and Development School to obtain a Master's in Business Administration. So thank you so much, Tony, for joining us and setting the stage on why nature-based solutions are important in urban landscapes, why we work in urban landscapes, and what IUCN is doing in these environments. I'll open the floor.
Thank you very much, Zoe, for the kind introduction, and indeed delighted to be joining you today as part of this dialogue. So I have a few slides to introduce and set the stage, and yeah, maybe first in the next slide we will see well, to start with, why are NBS critically important in the urban and built-up environment? We can first take a look at on why IUCN and how IUCN decided to step in the urban environment. For almost 7 decades, IUCN has worked on biodiversity and nature conservation. You may be very familiar with the IUCN Red List of threatened species, or our guidelines, or typology of protected areas. But since, let's say, the beginning of this century, we've had increasingly were asked to work on the urban landscapes. First in 2016, as part of IUCN World Conservation Congress in Hawaii, we were requested by our council and members assembly to further incorporate the urban conservation into the work of the Union. And why is that? Well, increasingly, within IUCN, we've realized and acknowledged the majority of the world populations is urban, and that urban people are critical for nature conservation. We need to engage society at large, and hence we need to be present and raise awareness on the role of nature in cities. In addition, we also acknowledge, that cities development are the first most commonly mentioned threat to biodiversity as per IUCN Red List of threatened species. So we see also the increasing impacts cities generate on species. And this is why, from that moment, from 2016, there is an increasing momentum in IUCN to work on urban biodiversity and deploying urban NBS. And that is why, well, we first now welcome cities and subnational government as a member category within IUCN, but we also have a dedicated target in our Nature 2030 program, which guide IUCN work and which basically aim at promoting that nature and people are thriving in cities while addressing urban challenges, which is again the essence of NBS. And we have also very high ambition to deliver. By 2025, we want to have engaged with up to 100 cities in representing 100 million inhabitants in assessing their impact on biodiversity and enhancing high quality green spaces. So this is the ambition set out in the Marseille Manifesto, and which we will look forward to achieve. So to achieve this ambition, IUCN has created the Urban Alliance, and we've generated already a couple of knowledge products. One is the IUCN Urban Nature Indexes that help cities understand the state of nature and their impact on nature and set targets to deliver on a nature positive goal. And also to achieve that, we've released the IUCN Urban Toolbox, which basically compiles a set of over IUCN knowledge product and explain how those can be mobilized to assess, plan, implement, and monitor actions and including NBS. One of the tools covered in IUCN Urban Toolbox has to do with the NBS standard, which in next slide you can see basically the structure, no? And I'm sure you're familiar with this tool. So as you may have heard, we now have a self-assessment tool which help project developers to go through their assessment, no, through these 8 standard criteria and 28 indicators. And important again here to say that the NBS standard is not a tick box, no, it's not a pass or no pass way of standard. It's set to put project developers into a learning curve and to enhancement so that the deployment of NBS are more effective. And so this is why we've also started to develop case studies on how cities have deployed NBS and how those projects meet IUCN standard criteria. So we have 2 publications now in China released in 2023 and one focusing on European cities in 2019. I invite you to take a look to this publication and hopefully we can soon have one sort of this publication for African cities and NBS based thanks to SUNCASA. And so maybe one important thing also to announce is that we're working on technical guidelines for the NBS standard for urban NBS, and that will be released in early 2025. Then yeah, let's to close my introduction and have this more regional focus. I would like to stress that looking at this excellent tool WRI has released, which is called the Aqueduct Water Risk Atlas, it is pretty clear that Sub-Saharan African cities are severely exposed to either excess or shortage of water. We can see on the left the riverine flood risk that affects Sub-Saharan Africa, and on the right the overall water risk, and quite few large cities are really facing critical issues. One can think of Cape Town in South Africa that reached day zero in 2018 due to a prolonged drought. So this is typically one city where challenges require action at watershed level, in that case, the Berg Oliphant River Basin. But other cities are also facing a critical challenge and are already taking action in terms of NBS. I would mention Nairobi in Kenya, which also face rapid population growth and pollution, and has already developed some action to manage flood, but that remains quite a challenge even this year. So other cities include also Lagos in Nigeria and Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, which also face severe flooding and drought risks, and that are also some very often exacerbated by overpressure. For instance, in Addis Ababa, the water is also required for agriculture. So that is why there is no silver bullet, and not one size fits all to address these issues. And certainly there will be a need of combining approach such as regulation, incentives, market-based instruments to address these issues. And also very important to stress, one single city government can't address it all alone. That is why we need a sort of whole of government approach involving multiple levels of governance, the central government, the subnational governments, regions, that can, depending on their role and responsibilities, collaborate and partner to address these issues, not only at city level, but also at watershed level. And also we need a whole of society approach, no? Civil society, private sector need to be part of this solution. And this is also something essential, no, in the NBS standard to involve these over sector of society. With that, I would conclude my words. Thank you very much, Zoe, for the opportunity, and over to you.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you for those concluding thoughts on the importance of involving different stakeholders and how that's key, because there is no silver bullet. And so I'll go ahead and introduce Yanina, who is the coordinator and the lead for SUNCASA, the project that we'll be learning from today. So a little bit about Yanina. She is IISD's lead for the SUNCASA project and oversees the technical implementation of its activities across Johannesburg, Kigali, and Dire Dawa. She has over 12 years of experience in international development, consulting, and government relations, with expertise in agriculture, climate mitigation and adaptation, and clean energy. Before joining IISD, Yanina spent 5 years working for the Agricultural Social Enterprise on the 1 Acre Fund across East and Southern Africa. She subsequently works for CARE International and Dahlberg Advisors in Guinea-Conakry before transitioning to focus on international climate adaptation and mitigation projects at the German Ministry of Agriculture and the Swiss Foundation My Climate. Janina holds a BA from the University of Cambridge and a master's from the Institute of Development Studies in Brighton. So over to you, Yanina, to tell us a little bit about SUNCASA and how it engages these various sectors that Tony mentioned and its overall approach in these 3 cities.
Yeah, thank you, Zoe. Thanks for the introduction and also just for the opportunity to showcase our project here. We're in the early stages of starting the implementation of SUNCASA, so it's a great opportunity for us to discuss this with colleagues. So I'll just be giving a very quick overview to set the stage for our panel discussion later of what SUNCASA does. We do have representatives from all of our different project sites on the panel today, so if there are more detailed questions that anyone has, there will be opportunities to go into more detail. So SUNCASA is a project that's funded by Global Affairs Canada through Partnering for Climate, similar to NAbSA. And the overall objective is to implement gender-responsive, nature-based solutions to strengthen the resilience of urban communities, watersheds, and biodiversity to the impacts of climate change, while also reducing barriers to the participation of women and other underrepresented groups. We already mentioned the project is focused on urban contexts. So there are 3 cities where the project is being implemented. That is Dire Dawa in Ethiopia, Kigali in Rwanda, which is where I'm based, and Johannesburg in South Africa. And we are implementing this project together with the World Resources Institute, and we are working with a lot of partners on the ground who have expertise in their specific contexts and the various different components of the project as well. Overall, we're estimating that about 2.2 million people will be positively impacted by the project, and over 50% of those will be women. You can go to the next slide. Thank you, Zoe. We've broken down here the goals a little bit more in detail, just to shed light on the different aspects that this project does touch on. So one big aspect is obviously the reducing the risk for flood and ensuring water security. And that is really at the core of implementing gender-responsive, nature-based solutions to restore and rehabilitate river catchments in these 3 different cities that I mentioned. The other big focus is promoting gender equality and social inclusion. So really there's a big component of helping remove barriers for women and other underrepresented groups that are disproportionately affected by climate change. And help them get engaged in decision-making around climate adaptation and also, planning, delivery, and monitoring of those interventions. Ultimately, we're trying to build more resilient livelihoods and protect local biodiversity, but we're also conscious that a lot of our activities are going to hopefully generate some economic opportunities, so green jobs and also just job skills. So ultimately, we're looking to improve the well-being of communities and also developing green public spaces, which will not just benefit the people that are directly involved in the project, but the cities at a bigger scale. Next slide, please. So the overall outcome that we're expecting from SUNCASA is really enhanced climate adaptation and gender equality, as well as biodiversity protection in urban communities in Ethiopia, Rwanda, and South Africa. We've broken this down into 3 different focus outcomes, I would say. They're intermediate outcomes. So one is centered around reduced barriers to participation of women and other underrepresented groups in the implementation of nature-based solutions. The second one is the increased adoption of gender-responsive nature-based solutions in watershed conservation and restoration. And the third one is centered around enhanced, inclusive, and gender-responsive governance for implementation of nature-based solutions. And this involves a little bit more the government side of things. Next slide. So I've got one slide for each city. It is really very condensed into what we're doing in each of those contexts. So again, remember that we have panelists who are in these 3 cities and can give you a little bit more detail. So in Diradawa in Ethiopia, we're working to restore the Dichattu River catchment. And this is really to address flood risks, erosion, deal with urban heat, and also water stress. So the way that we're doing this there is through afforestation, reforestation, as well as agroforestry for both runoff management, but also generating livelihoods. And there's also an urban tree planting element to reduce flooding and heat impacts. The objective of this is to reduce soil erosion around the river and enhance groundwater recharge, but also to develop buffer zones and expand opportunities for agroforestry for the local communities, to improve land productivity, including crop yields, and also access to technology. And we're estimating that about 200,000 people living in those flood-prone areas around the Dichattu River will be benefiting from this intervention. You can see the logos of our partners here. So we're partnering closely with the city of Diradawa, with HCS, that's Harare Catholic Secretariat, and the Haramaya University. Then moving to Kigali, here we're working to restore really critical upstream microcatchments in the lower Nyabarongo River watershed to reduce flood risk, landslide, and soil erosion. Anyone who's been to Kigali or to Rwanda in general knows there's a lot of hills here, and so the risk of landslides in particular is very present for many local communities. So again, our approaches here are afforestation and reforestation, agroforestry, urban tree planting, and the establishment of vegetated buffer zones to stabilize gullies. So ultimately, we're seeking to rehabilitate microcatchments to enhance the resilience of those households that are in the high-risk areas, but also trying to control a little bit the encroachment on the watershed areas. And here the estimate is that 975,000 people in 3 different districts in Kigali will benefit from the intervention. Again, we're working closely with the city government, as well as our technical partners, that is Rwanda Young Water Professionals, Avega, who's our gender partner, and ARCOS, which is our conservation and nature-based solutions technical partner. And then last but not least, in Johannesburg, which is probably the most urban of the 3 settings, if we had to categorize it just through its size. We are working with SUNCASA along the Yaqui River, and that is to decrease flooding, improve urban heat management, enhance water security, and protect biodiversity. There's a much bigger focus here on removing alien invasive species, which are a big problem for Johannesburg's waterways. And so there will be some tree planting of indigenous species after the removal, and also a little bit more horticultural activities, all ultimately to rehabilitate the riverbanks, to manage urban heat, boost water security, and also increase indigenous plants and expand green spaces for the communities. We've got a big group of beneficiaries here. The estimate is about 1.05 million people along the Yukske River in Johannesburg. And appropriately for this city's size, we also have the most partners here. So you can see all their logos here. Obviously, we're working with the city government, as well as Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo. Then Johannesburg Inner City Partnership is a big partner. And then our technical partners are Alexandra Water Warriors, that you can also see here in the picture on the top right, which is from a recent visit when the Canadian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Melanie Joly, came to visit and see what our partners are doing. And other technical partners are Water for the Future, Gender CC, our gender partner, and Zutari as well. So I think I'll stop here. I know this is a lot of information for all these different cities, but I hope that we'll have a chance to touch on some of these aspects in a little bit more detail in the panel discussion. Back to you, Zoe. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanina, and thank you for that information. I think both of the presentations we just heard were hopefully able to orient our conversation a little bit. So we'll go ahead and move to our panel discussion. And we are delighted to have, as you said, Yanina, representatives from each of these different cities and their different approaches and how they're similar and different. So I will go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Alemakef Tasu. All right. So Alemakef is an urban development project specialist at the World Resources Institute, and he's also SUNCASA's city lead for Dire Dawa, Ethiopia. Prior to joining WRI, Alemakef worked as urban slum upgrading project manager for Habitat for Humanity International in Ethiopia, where he was responsible for designing and implementing urban slum upgrading projects and strategy, including urban planning and development, WASH, construction technology, and housing support services in the urban slum context. Previously, he worked for the Ethiopian Ministry of Urban Development, Housing and Construction in the position of Urban Research and Development Director, as well as for the Central Statistical Agency as statistician and GIS expert. Alemakef holds a BA in Geography and a Master's in Urban Development and Management from Addis Ababa University, and as well as a Master's in Science in Environmental Science from Ambo University. We welcome him today, and I will go ahead and pass the floor, Alemakef, to briefly tell us about your work in Dire Dawa.
Okay, thank you, Zoe, for the introduction. Yeah, actually, Janina already said much about the SUNCASA project in 3 African cities. For the next few minutes, I will just briefly provide information to the participants about the Dire Dawa, what we're doing under SUNCASA project and our progress so far. So maybe just to start with, Dire Dawa is one of the secondary cities in Ethiopia, second largest cities in Ethiopia, next to Addis Ababa, having a total population of over 500,000, where 68% of this population reside in urban territory of the Dire Dawa administration. Geographically, Dire Dawa is located at about 515 kilometers away from Addis Ababa in the eastern direction, to our way to Djibouti, where we have got this access to the port. When it comes to the historical vulnerability of Dire Dawa to flash flood, there are actually 4 different rivers that passes through the city of Dire Dawa, posing a high flood risk due to a flash flooding. The city is mainly prone to flash flooding due to the Chatu River, where the SUNCASA project is aimed to restore and rehabilitate. So the devastating flood was occurred in 2006, which is one of the most severe floods in the history of the city, which causes or resulted in over 300 fatalities as well as extensive damage to infrastructure. The high death toll was attributed to this flood risk, peak occurring during the nighttime where people are not ready, and there is no even warning system for the people to take care of. So that the death was due to the happening of the flash flooding at nighttime. Prior to significant floods were also recorded in Dire Dawa in April 1981, in April 1994, also in May 2005, as well as there are over 35 fatalities and estimated damage of over 10 million Ethiopian birr in May 2025, which is also the other second largest flash flooding in the history of the city. In addition to the flash flooding, the cities also have other challenges like degraded ecosystem, the fragmented ecosystem, and unstable land use practice in Dredwa and the surrounding area contributed to this flash risk. In addition to this, there is also other challenges related to urbanization. The city is experiencing very rapid urbanization, and also infrastructure is also in strain. Population growth has outpaced infrastructure development and also faces serious challenges in service provision. There is also disproportionate green space coverage in the city, also increase in informal settlement in very high-risk areas, mainly around the Chatu River catchment, which is very susceptible for the flash flooding. Widespread unemployment, improper solid and liquid waste management, and also disposal into even the nearby rivers is also the other main challenges observed in Dredwa. So in order to just respond to all these environmental challenges as well as man-made challenges in Dredwa, we designed with our partners in Dredwa the SUNCASA project. Before designing the SUNCASA project, of course, we carried out a pre-feasibility study with one of our partners, Haramain University. Based on that pre-feasibility study, we designed the SUNCASA project. As Janina mentioned, the SUNCASA project mainly seeks to use nature to enhance climate adaptation, gender equality, as well as social inclusion and biodiversity protection in urban communities in Sub-Saharan African countries, including Dredwa. So the overall objective of the SUNCASA project in Dredwa is just strengthening the resilience of the urban communities in and around Dredwa, watershed management, as well as biodiversity to the impacts of climate change while reducing the barriers to end-based participation of women and other unrepresented groups. Our approach in SUNCASA, maybe Janina mentioned some of it, we are highly working with our local partners. We also, our success, we believe that the success of the SUNCASA project in Dredwa is based on our enhanced understanding of the gender impacts, a deeper understanding of how climate change affects people differently based on their gender, and will encourage the adoption of gender responsive nature-based solution. We also believe that the success of the project will depend on local commitment to NAbSA. The local partners are dedicated to using NAbSA as a practical and financial sustainable approach to address climate-related challenges, as well as openness to gender-inclusive governance are the key approach we are using in Dredwa for the successful implementation of the SUNCASA project. The SUNCASA project is aimed to benefit over almost the entire population of the city, including the urban population, which are highly affected by this flash flooding. Rural farming population, this project will enhance soil and water conservation so that increased agricultural yield and reducing flooding can also benefit the rural farming communities and population. Also, the rural landless population, because through this SUNCASA project, we are aiming to create some economic benefit for the youth, mainly the women and also unemployed users. So through green job creation, we do believe that the rural landless population will benefit from this project. And also those who utilize underground water will also benefit from the SUNCASA project, as some of, almost actually no some, all of our implementation activities on the ground contributed toward this increased groundwater recharge. Overall, in Dredwa, this project aims to benefit over 500,000 population, and indirectly, we think the project will benefit over 200,000 population. Directly, over 4,000 populations through job creation and different training and capacity building activity will be benefited from the SUNCASA activities in Dredwa. The key SUNCASA activities in Dredwa are mainly the NAbSA activities. We focus on the green activities. We don't have any green activities in Dredwa. So our key activities are related to afforestation. Through afforestation, we're planning to rehabilitate nearly 315 hectares of land in Dredwa through planting over 7,000 trees through afforestation. The other one is agroforestry. We're planning to carry out agroforestry activities on farmlands, which we plan to cover nearly over 385 hectares of land through agroforestry. And also planning to create a buffer zone of 38 kilometers across the Chatu River. As I said, the Chatu is one of the major rivers that causes flash flooding in Redwa because of encroachment and settlement and some agricultural activities in the mouth of the Chatu River. The river mouth is expanding from year to year, so that we are aiming to plan to at least create a buffer zone of 20 meters left and right, which covers 38 kilometers across the river of the Chatu. We have also urban tree planting in urban areas of Dredwa. As I said, Dredwa is an administration having both urban Kabbales as well as rural Kabbales. Kabbales are the smallest administrative unit in Ethiopia. So Dredwa have both urban as well as rural area. So we have activities in rural areas. As I said, afforestation, agroforestry, and buffer zones are mainly carried out in rural parts of Dredwa. We have also other urban-related activities like urban tree planting. We also have some plan to develop some community green space. As I said earlier, the available green space in Dredwa are inadequate, and even the distribution is uneven. So just we are planning to develop some model green space in Dredwa, mainly in urban areas of the city. So far in Dredwa, we already started the implementation of the SUNCASA project with our partners. Recently, in August 19, we launched the first SUNCASA tree planting in Dredwa, where the global partners, ICD, as well as leadership from WRR, and also the mayor of Dredwa participated in this tree planting of the first SUNCASA tree planting in Dredwa. So far, we already planted over 300,000 seedlings of various species were planted by users organized through this project to take care of this SUNCASA project. We already actually organized users in cooperative. So far, 35 groups organized, each having 10 members. Of those, we have a total of actually 315 unemployed users, including men and women, are part of this cooperative. And of this 335, nearly 210 of them are women. As I said, SUNCASA is a gender-responsive project activity. We give due priorities to women to be part of the implementation of the SUNCASA project. So far, 200 women organized in different groups are taking part in taking care of the planting seedlings through this project. So these youth groups are actively caring for the planted seedlings and have also received capacity building training in collaboration with our global staff and also local partners, because we have two partners, local partners, implementing the ground SUNCASA activities. As Janina mentioned, one is the Harare Catholic Secretariat, which is managing most of the NAbSA activities in rural areas. And we have also the university, which is providing technical support to the Harare Catholic Secretariat, as well as the users organized to be part of this SUNCASA project. And in
I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm very curious to hear more, but we need to move on to our next speaker, and maybe we can touch on some of the points that you were going to share with us then in the panel. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah,
I'm very curious.
Actually, I'm just on my last slide. So this is actually my update about the SUNCASA project in Dredwa. Thank you all, and maybe I will respond to some of the questions that might be raised during the discussion. Thank you, and over to you, Zoe.
Thank you, Alimake. So our next speaker that we're delighted to welcome today is Ndivine Mokoena. She's a project coordinator with Gender CC South Africa, Women for Climate Justice, which is an NGO based in Johannesburg, focusing on climate and gender justice issues, including policy advocacy, community capacity building, and awareness raising on climate change. Ndivine has vast experience with climate change, gender, and social issues since 2010, when she joined Earthlife Africa, Johannesburg's Women in Energy and Climate Change Forum. She works with women cooperatives on energy, agriculture, and other social issues that are exacerbated by climate change, while also engaging with governments on the integration of gender and social issues into climate policies and the Just Transition Framework. NAbSA also represents South Africa's community voices in an international project linked to the UNFCCC called Not Without Us, funded by Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. We're delighted to welcome her today, and I'll open the floor for her to speak a little bit about her work in South Africa and what she does. And then we are excited to hear about her experiences with the panel discussion. So over to you, NAbSA.
Thank you so much, Zoe, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Yeah, thank you to Janine and Tony for laying the foundation about the project and also nature-based solutions. Yeah, Janine touched on what the project is all about and what we do in different cities. So without repeating what she has said, as an organization, Gender CC, which works on gender and climate justice, our main focus is on advocacy for gender equality and social inclusion, and also capacity building, raising awareness, and yeah, doing research work around climate change and gender issues. So our role in this SUNCASA project is to bring in the JC dimension, which is intended to inform the design of the project and subsequent activities and implementing mechanisms in an urban area. I'm glad that Tony, in his presentation, he elaborated on the importance of the urban areas, how they are impacted by climate change. As we all know, that cities are playing a pivotal role in contributing and combating climate change. So in South Africa, and Johannesburg in particular, due to migration from rural areas to urban areas, cities are affected by overpopulation, and moreover in Johannesburg, as it is the business hub for South Africa, everyone is flocking to Johannesburg. So it is one of the cities that are severely affected by the impacts of climate change. So the nature-based solution are widely recognized as key cost-effective means to reducing climate change risk vulnerabilities, while contributing to improved adaptation and biodiversity outcomes. However, there is still a gap in how women and other underrepresented groups are engaged in NBS, despite their key role in protecting and managing natural resources. So the JC approach in this project and NBS activities is key, as women in African cities are disproportionately responsible for managing food, water, and energy resources, highly dependent on infrastructure services, and their mobility within the cities may be restricted. So, yeah, they also face intersectional and gender-based barriers to information, finance, and other resources, thereby increasing their vulnerability to climate impacts and prohibiting them from participating in decision-making due to prevalent social norms, which is key, that they have to be part of the process. So in responding to these challenges, the project aims to enhance climate adaptation, gender equality, and biodiversity protection in urban communities, as alluded to by Janina. So in our approach and in our work as the JC partner in this project, we're focusing mainly on 4 key areas, which is gender equality and social inclusion and empowerment, promoting the rights of women and the underrepresented groups. We're looking at growth that works for everyone, environment and climate action, and inclusive governance, because government are critical partners into this project, especially the local government officials. So in integrating the JC approach, we ensure that our activities are not only effective, but also equitable. The strategy is designed to inform both planning and implementation phases of the projects, ensuring that it addresses the diverse needs of all vulnerable groups, not just women and girls, but everyone who is marginalized and underrepresented. And the gender equality part of it traditionally aims to ensure that women and men have equal rights, opportunities, and access to resources. So the JSE goes beyond this by addressing a wider range of inequalities and barriers that various groups are facing when it comes to social issues, economic issues, and now the climate change impacts. I'll stop there for now. Zoe, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ndivyo, for those statements. And I'm very interested to hear your perspectives from the gender lens. So we'll go ahead and move on to our final speaker. I'm delighted to welcome Vedaste Uwainsenga. He's the director of the Construction Permitting One-Stop Center Unit at Kigali City, where he plays a crucial role in overseeing urban development and construction activities. His career spans various sectors, demonstrating a broad expertise in urban planning, land management, and infrastructure development. Previously, Vedaste served as an advisor to the mayor of Kigali, focusing on key areas such as housing, urbanization, and informal settlement upgrading. His experience also includes working as a research assistant for USAID land project and as senior geofield technician for an Australian mining and mineral exploration company operating in Rwanda. Vedaste holds a master's degree in regional development planning and management from the Technical University of Dortmund in Germany and the Federal University of ABC in Brazil. He earned his bachelor's degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Rwanda, and Vedaste is an active member of the local consultative board for the Africa Cities Lab project in Rwanda. His extensive experience working with local governments, consulting firms, coupled with his interests in land use planning, housing, and infrastructure development, positions him as a leading expert in this field. And we are delighted to have him. Vedaste, if you'd go ahead and like to say maybe a few words on what you work on and what you do. And then we'll go ahead and move to our set questions. And I'm seeing already a question in the chat from Sarem, and so we'll get to that as well. Over to you, Vedaste.
Thank you very much. I'm happy attending this today. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you. Are you able to turn your video on, or is the connection not good?
Unfortunately, I'm in the busy area. Because
No problem.
Yes, sorry.
No problem.
So, thank you for having me today. As you introduced my bio, I'm director of construction permitting one-stop center unit in Rwanda, especially in the state of Kigali, the capital city, and also the busiest city in Rwanda. Going directly to the point, the state of Kigali is the economic powerhouse of the country and also the most urbanized city in Rwanda. So due to that pressure, due to rapid and urban development, which was sustainable in the recent years, for example, in 2 or 3 decades ago, the city faces significant stormwater management, and which resulted in flooding across the city and other environmental hazards, for example. But in recent years, we tried to do the master plan of the city, which incorporate all the aspects regarding the environmental management, the urban development, control, the zoning regulation, and so forth. So in the master plan, we've included some very good initiative. For example, the informal settlement upgrading. During the upgrading, mostly we focused on green infrastructures, but we have seen that these green infrastructures didn't just bring the result what we really want, because we didn't incorporate the I would say the soft infrastructures, for example, related to green and so forth. So I'm not going to focus only on the previous project regarding maybe SUNCASA and the other things, but I'm going to only to focus on the current project, the cross-cutting project that we have in the city regarding the wetland restoration in Rwanda urban development project that we have, and also forests and slope management, and also green and blue infrastructure. So we are developing some other sub-master plans, I would say, that will incorporate the blue-green corridors that we didn't develop in the previous master plan. And also, we are trying to see how we can restore the wetland that we have. For example, who have been in Kigali, there was an industrial zone. The previous industrial zone was constructed in the wetland zone near Kicukiro, to those who knows well the district of Kigali. So we are trying to, 10 years ago, we relocated those industries to the other special economic zone where we dedicated the industries. So we are trying to do the restoration of all those wetland, and also the SUNCASA project. It comes as a complementary project because it will help us to restore the upstream part, so that for us we can concentrate on the downstream, and we are trying to initiate more and more of approaches, not only in this, but also in our daily responsibilities. For example, we are trying to see how we can incorporate the minimum green building compliance within the city, so that as a department that is in charge of issuing the construction permit, we also need just to reduce the impermeable surface, so that we can enforce the minimum landscaping within each and every plot. For example, now we are considering that 20% for residential plots must be covered by permeable or green grasses or other aspects, but it must be reflected as a green landscape or a green space within each and every plot. And I think for the other initiative we have, we also did the feasibility study that covers the whole city for nature-based solution, because in Kigali we have the landscape is so challenging because we have hilly valleys and everything. So we are still in the piloting phase, but at least now we have the feasibility study that covers the whole city, so that we know we can implement these nature-based solutions initiative in this city, in this part, or in this part, according to the study that we have kind of evidence, the concrete evidence that we can consider during the implementation of different projects within our city. So thank you very much. I'm ready to have conversation with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, and yes, as you said, we're ready for conversation. So we will go ahead and move to the discussion and question portion. So we already have some questions from the Q&A, which is great. So if participants, if there's a question you might have based on the discussion that happens, feel free to put them either in the chat or the Q&A. I will be monitoring it, so don't worry about your question being missed. So I kind of want to open the floor and maybe start off with a question of, we've kind of touched on the ways that NBS can enhance urban resilience already, and maybe we can discuss in greater detail the issues of equitable water access within urban areas, and how NBS nature-based solutions can help alleviate that and elevate equitable access. And please feel free to jump in, whoever speaker wants to go first.
I can go in here.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think for us, with the focus on the JESI component, enhancing the resilience of urban communities and environment, looking at the social issues, the first thing for us that is important is to challenge inequalities, because they bring about discrimination and disadvantage for those vulnerable groups. So challenging those inequalities, like harmful and discriminatory social beliefs, norms, and practices, which prohibit mainly women and other vulnerable groups equal access to natural resources and water, which is a basic human right. So we also feel that building capacity for women and these vulnerable groups, women's organizations and cooperatives to meaningfully participate in equal decision-making with respect to accessing water and natural resources, and also their governance, which is quite important. Working with local government actors as well is quite important to uphold global and national level commitments. We need to hold them accountable to all those commitments to gender equality by delivering programs and services that support gender responsive NBS activities for climate change adaptation. And of course, applying JESI intervention, like doing community vulnerability assessments, stakeholder mapping, intersectional planning, where we applying the JESI lens in planning, monitoring, and implementation. Also training and advocacy and knowledge sharing, which is quite important. Yeah, I'll stop there for now. Thanks, Zoe.
Thank you, Indivu. Veraste, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I would say in nowadays society or in our cities, sometimes we don't really consider the importance of nature-based solutions, not only in our community, like local community, but also in our workspace setting, I would say, because we need just to have this kind of awareness. People, they must be aware, they understand, kind of having this kind of sense of ownership, because most of like engineers, urban planners, architects, when we are doing those things, for example, we must concentrate on green infrastructure, this kind of hardcore infrastructure. We don't really consider those things, other software one. For example, the that you have mentioned, for example, the water, like distribution or like access to clean water. Sometimes we don't really consider all those aspects, and we see ourselves like concentrating on building like large dams and everything. But for me, I would consider first just to challenge ourselves, having the kind of sense of ownership and do the awareness. People, they must be aware, and then just to have this kind of inclusive participation. I think that's what is challenging nowadays. And I also think it's one of the most of approach that we are using, not only in distribution or doing this kind of nature-based solution implementation, but also in informal settlement upgrading. We do the local community participation. We try to just include them in each and every planning that we are doing. And I think that might help other communities and other cities. And yeah, I can stop from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Veraste. Janina, would you like to come in?
Sure, yes, I really just really agree with colleagues and wanted to add a few points, especially to what Ndivile said. So I think when it comes to equitable access to water resources, SUNCASA is a good example of the things to look out for at the planning stages. So as I said earlier, we are making a point of working exactly with those groups who are disadvantaged with regard to water access, but also with regard to generally be involved in building resilience and climate adaptation and so on. So I think nature-based solution interventions really have to go hand in hand with making a point of involving the groups that we want to improve access for. So that would be one thing. I think what Ndibile also said is really contextualization. So in responding to the specific contextual circumstances on the ground. So in our case, the circumstances in Johannesburg are very different from Kigali and from Dire Dawa. And so in our project, we're trying to go and really do very localized assessments of what needs to be done, who are the groups that need more access to water resources, and how can they be involved in the process as well. And then with regard to involving them, we incorporated a lot of capacity building and training initiatives to make sure that those underrepresented groups not only have the knowledge about the nature-based solution interventions themselves, but also are empowered to engage in the decision-making, in the planning of interventions going forward, because some of these groups are already engaged in managing water resources for the community. Johannesburg is actually a very good example because there are a lot of women who are working along the Yukskei River to clean it up. They have already formed community groups, women's groups that are engaged in this already. And so it's a matter of bringing them in and making sure that they have a seat at the table so that they can help design systems and processes where underrepresented groups can speak for equitable access to water resources in their area.
Thank you, Unia. Makif?
Yeah, thank you. Also, I fully agree with comments from colleagues. Yes. Anyways, I do believe that anyways offer a natural and sustainable approach to managing water resources in urban areas by providing multiple benefits for both human and environmental health. And maybe through NAbSA implementation, maybe we can promote water conservation. NAbSA can raise awareness about water conservation and encouraging residents to adopt more sustainable water use practices. It's also implementation of NAbSA can also improve water quality and increases groundwater recharge, the case in Rwanda planning, because Rwanda is located in very lowland areas where too much water is a problem and too little water is also a problem in Rwanda. When it's too much, as flash flooding, it affects the city. When it's too little, also causes water stress in the city. And even most of the water source of the city is depending on underground water. People are exploiting that underground water. Unless that underground water is, recharged in a very short period of time, the city might be in a high risk of water shortage. So through implementation of NAbSA activities, would be possible to even increase the recharge of water, underground water by infiltrating rainwater, and NAbSA can also replenish groundwater supplies, which can be used as a source of drinking water and also other agricultural activities. So as colleagues said, the implementation of NAbSA can also improve the water management practice as well as water use in urban areas. Yeah, that's what I want to share, and thank you to you, Zoe.
Thank you, Makif. So I agree wholeheartedly, and I think what you each highlighted in these in your responses were the nature that these processes need to be inclusive. So it's not only about raising awareness, but bringing in inclusivity, especially in the policy frameworks and regulations that are needed to actually realize the goals of this project and any sort of initiative in urban landscapes. And I think that kind of touches on a question that we got from an audience member around what were the strategies and action plans implemented to mainstream sustainable practices into urban policy planning. And that's a question to you all. And maybe I can add a little bit and say maybe what are the policies and frameworks and regulations that are needed to support NBS implementation and water resource management? So heavy question, but please feel free to respond, whoever would like to go first.
I can maybe make a start, but I think I would also, I think Alemakev will have much better knowledge of the Diradawa context than I do. So let me comment on Johannesburg and Kigali briefly, and Vedast, feel free to correct me as well. So in order to prepare for the project, we actually took into account all manner of adaptation policies and climate-related policies, anything to do with water and anything to do with forestry that was available in the 3 cities that we're working in with this project. So for South Africa, we looked at the South African National Environment Management Biodiversity Act. We looked at invasive species regulations, the Climate Action Plan. I'm just giving a couple of examples here, but there's basically, in each city, we have a whole list of existing policies that we're trying to harmonize this project with, make sure, and that's also why we're working closely with the city governments to make sure that that our interventions are in line with government recommendations. And then the flip side of that is that there's often limited knowledge about nature-based solutions and the alternatives that there might be to traditional infrastructure interventions to improve resilience. And so SUNCASA also includes capacity building, not just for local communities, but also for government officials. So there will be multiple training opportunities to transfer knowledge about nature-based solutions, the benefits, and also the cost effectiveness of them to government officials as well, to equip them with the ability to then influence policymaking going forward in the climate adaptation space. So we have those capacity building initiatives for government, and then also for communities to be able to influence that policymaking as well, and be able to feed sort of current issues into that policymaking. And then in Kigali, we're working very closely with the Kigali master plan. It's a sort of 5-year smart city plan that includes a lot of issues around climate vulnerable areas, flooding, stormwater issues, and landslides. So we're making sure that we are in line with the city government agencies and planning documents. And we're working with all the relevant authorities here as well. So the Rwanda Forestry Authority, the Water Resources Board, the Environmental Management Authority, and so on. To make sure that policies are in line, but also that it's a conversation, and perhaps both sides can learn from the implementation of this project and take this into policymaking going forward as well. Alemakev, I don't know if you want to add anything, or Vedast on the specific context.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Janina. Yeah, actually, while we're designing the SUNCASA project for Diradawa, we would also try to look at some of the available and existing policy documents in Diradawa related to NBS implementation as well as water resource management. Of course, as you mentioned, for Kigali, the Diradawa city has also a master plan, and we just also try to look at that the master plan of the city, which also has different land use for different activities. And also the city has also this integrated water resource management strategy. We also just look at that the strategy and the city land use planning, as well as the environmental impact assessment strategy. Actually, it is a proclamation for the city for any projects before implementation. It requires to have environmental impact assessment and the like, and the city is also now developing this climate adaptation plan. But of course, to some extent, the city has some policy and strategy document at hand, but the issue is on implementation. So under the SUNCASA project, we are also looking at building the capacity of the city administration and to implement those policies and strategy documents prepared for NBS implementation as well as water resource management. So in project spread. Hopefully, we will just put some of those policy documents on the ground, and maybe the city will implement those policies with some of the capacity building activity we are planning for them. And thank you, and over to you, Zoe.
Thanks, Alamake. Vedast, did you want to add to those answers?
I think Janina covered most of the regulations and policy framework that we are using here, but I can add on some. And for the city of Kigali also, we have an annual target to achieve. For example, like planting trees, for example, we have 2 million trees to plant for next fiscal year. So we have also to follow that. It's a kind of a national policy, but for each and every district or province, they have their targets. So for example, for us, we also focus on the city targets. We set the targets and try to set milestone to achieve those targets. But just to achieve that, we have also to plan with the other institutions within central government institutions, just to avoid the overlapping responsibilities of planning, or to design two, or for example, Rwanda Water Board or Rwanda Forest Authority. We have to sit together to see where would we have a gap, where do we need to put more efforts, and we again refer to the policy framework that have been set by the government. For example, the watershed management policy, something like that. The environmental policy, we follow all those broad guidelines and try just to do the small milestone just to achieve those milestones. But all on the whole, we collaborate with other institutions and we set the targets to achieve every year. That's how we try just to incorporate nature-based solution in our daily activities, referring to the national policies and other strategies. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Vedast. And David, would you like to add as well? I see your hand is raised.
Yes, very quickly. I think from a gender perspective, when we look at the policies, most policies are gender blind and they don't consider social issues and what is really happening at the local level, because that's where the impacts are felt, and that's what has to inform the policies. So what we see with the policies is that they are just informed by science and researchers, academics, but what is happening local, the local knowledge and activities, real activities that are taking place at local level are not considered. So just to emphasize the point that was made by Tony earlier on, that different stakeholders are key in addressing climate change in biodiversity and also in using nature-based solutions. So having everybody on board is really critical. I am happy that with this SUNCASA project, we have everyone on board, even the government officials, the decision makers, policy makers, and every step of the way, they are guided by we have JESI guidelines that guide them, that this is the approach that you need to take. So hopefully the next review of policies will be gender responsive. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ndivile. I wholeheartedly agree with your statement that a lot of times these policies do not consult women or even indigenous peoples or people who maybe aren't typically involved in these processes. So thank you for highlighting that. I think it's important to note in this discussion around even in nature-based solutions, right? SUNCASA is gender responsive, but this is something we need to actively engage in order to have meaningful participation in policy processes. So thank you for highlighting that note. We have a question from Charles Ta in the Q&A box. Vedasta, I think this touches on maybe some of what you were saying around planting trees. So if you'd like to respond perhaps to this one first, and then obviously other speakers, please contribute as well. The question is, are current infrastructures capable of accommodating NBS like tree planting in cities? Would future infrastructure architecture need to be designed to include nature-based solutions? And can this be possible without significant policy regulations and change? I think that's a great question. Thank you, Charles, for that.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have been facing over the years. Most of the engineers and the architects, as I said before, we only focused on like having this kind of concrete infrastructure without considering the other aspect. And it is also difficult to incorporate at this very moment, for some cities. I'm not going to generalize, but for some cities, to incorporate nature-based solution with all along the existing infrastructure. But what we are trying to do for the state of Kigali, we are trying just to do kind of retrofitting, just to incorporate, to try to see how we can incorporate the nature-based solution where it is possible, and where we are still doing the planning, we incorporate in our planning the nature-based solution in our architecture design, in designing each and every aspect that we have. But also, I agree with Charles that we have also to consider nature-based solution in our policy design and also policy implementation, because for example, most of, I would say, people, they ignore the nature-based solution aspect while implementing the project, because they rush just to the end product, to the end result, without the end result just having a tarmac road, for example, just having drainage for 5 kilometers drainage, but without considering how it look like in 5 years to come. So we have also to consider this and just try to sit together with policymakers and decision makers and see how we can incorporate nature-based solution in our daily activities.
Thank you. Thank you, Vedast. Do our other speakers want to come in on this point?
Maybe,
Okay.
oh, sorry, go on, and I'll come back. Janina, go.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's precisely our activities in Johannesburg, where we do the removal of alien invasive species and replacing them with indigenous trees. And also, we have a lot of open spaces. So urban greening involves planting a lot of trees, because in these spaces, there's a lot of illegal dumping that is taking place. You find that these open spaces, there's a lot of waste that is dumped there illegally, and hence people, which rather affect the environment and a degradation to the environment. So some of these spaces, after the tree planting, they will be transformed into ecotourism spaces and parks. We're going to have green parks, so there is a lot of tree planting that is going to take place. I think we're looking at about 1,200 trees, including fruit trees, that are going to be planted, and not only in open spaces, but also in the people's yards. There's identified households for underrepresented groups, and also women-headed household and child-headed household, where the trees and the fruit trees are going to be planted there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, okay. This is really a very interesting question, because as you know, land is very critical in urban areas as compared to the counter rural areas. In most cases, the urban land is already covered by the green infrastructure, where it's very difficult to even carry out in large-scale tree planting in urban areas. This is a challenge here in Ethiopia too, but in recent time, we are working towards changing our policy of land allocation. For example, in urban areas, on the master plan, it states that 30% of the land will be allocated for green infrastructure, 13% for roads, and the remaining 14% for buildings and the like. But in most of the cities, the 30% land allocated for green infrastructure is already converted, and the land use is changed. One of our experience in Ethiopia here is we have this corridor development, which is initiated by the Prime Minister in Addis in the last few months. A lot of houses demolished and new roads as well as new green infrastructure developed. And as a second phase, this activity is also scaling up to other secondary cities, including Rwanda. So now we're working with the city administration at least to identify areas which already selected for this corridor development to implement some of the SUNCASA projects, because land is very critical and it's an issue in Rwanda to us. Most of the land is already occupied by the green infrastructure. So the issue, as you mentioned, some of it might require even policy change or some regulation to implement this. Even in Ethiopia, through the Green Legacy Initiative, we are planting billions of trees each year, including in our cities, we are planting millions of trees. But the key challenge in most cities is they don't have space to plant those trees, so that they are even demolishing some of the existing infrastructure to plant trees, which is also costing us, because those green infrastructure already built, occupied by some of them occupied by private holders. So when we're demolishing that one, it's also affecting the implementation process. So it's really a very critical issue in most urban areas in Ethiopia, but which, as you mentioned, requires some policy changes from the government as far as tree planting in urban areas is concerned. It's a nice question. Thank you.
I can really only agree with colleagues. I just wanted to mention that one of the reasons why we work so closely with city governments is to make sure that the things that are planned as part of the SUNCASA project can be implemented. It's certainly not without its challenges, and we do acknowledge that some policy changes and some general planning changes are going to have to be made in order for this to be implemented fully and going forward as well. What we're hoping a little bit is that SUNCASA can help with this in the long run. We're seeing the project a little bit like a pilot, because there aren't actually a lot of reference cases to say we have a grey infrastructure proposal here and a nature-based solutions or nature-based infrastructure proposal here, and we can show with this data that the nature-based infrastructure is more beneficial, will be more cost-effective, and will have the same or better outcomes. So we're trying to also, through especially the valuations of nature-based infrastructure that we will be doing as part of SUNCASA, to generate a little bit of a data pool that can be referred to and that can help city governments to make good decisions going forward. So that doesn't help us right now, but we are hoping that implementing SUNCASA will help in the long run, and that this will be replicable and we can learn from this in other contexts as well.
Thank you, Yanina, for that addition. We've very quickly reached just 5 minutes before our close. I find that these webinars sometimes are difficult. You want to hear as much as possible, and time just creeps up on you. So I will ask attendees if there are any final questions to ask our speakers before we move to a quick mentee survey. Please ask them now, and we will address them either in the chat or in the Q&A function. Monitor. Doesn't look like there seems to be activity, but if there is, again, we will happily address them. So just quickly, here is the link to the Mentee survey we have planned. Oh, I see a question from Charles. Apologies, Charles. Maybe as people can sign on our speakers or sign into the Mentee, our speakers can address them. Are there any evaluation methodologies for urban NBS that you can share with participants?
Yes, so this is something that IISD has developed, and it is called the SAVI methodology that we are using to put a number to the value of nature-based solutions and nature-based infrastructure. So I can share the link on our website to read more details about that.
And Charles, I can also consult Tony if there are any available resources from IUCN's urban team for that. I'm sure there is something. All right. And I've put the Mentee link in the chat for easier access for those who prefer to just directly click on the link. And I will go ahead and move to the Mentee. All right. All right. So thank you all, and we'll move to the first question. How did you like this dialogue? For our French speakers, comment avez-vous apprécié ce dialogue? So we have really enjoyed it. I liked it. It was okay. And sorry, that fourth response is supposed to say I didn't like it at all. But hopefully the error will deter you from saying that. But please indicate if you didn't like this dialogue at all to select the last option right here. All right, so we have some positive feedback, which is great. I mean, I share those thoughts. I personally have really enjoyed getting to know a little bit more about SUNCASA's work and also just the context of urban landscapes. So agreed that it was an interesting dialogue. It was okay. Thank you. All right. Sake of time, we'll move on. Were the resources that we shared during this session useful? Do you plan to use it in your work? Is it relevant for your work? And then in French, trouvez-vous les ressources, outils, etc. partagés lors de cette session utile? Again, are these relevant for your work? Maybe you're not sure. Maybe you perhaps don't work on the urban environment and wouldn't be sure where to integrate them. All right, so we have 10 very useful, 4 somewhat useful, can be relevant, and 2 that are not certain. Absolutely. All right, we'll move on. What additional information would you like to receive on urban topics? They can be NBS, biodiversity, or both, or around gender. Quelle information souhaiteriez-vous recevoir sur des sujets urbains? So again, it can be a variety of topics, and we'll be happy to potentially follow up with those questions. So NBS and biodiversity, great. Evaluation, yes, that speaks to Charles's last question. Gender issues when it comes to climate adaptation, absolutely. We definitely, I'm sure IISD does as well, and the speakers definitely have some materials on that, but IUCN also has some publications on gender and its relationship with climate adaptation. Gender, strategic communications and governance, biodiversity and resilience, NBS in urban areas, successful stories for completed projects, absolutely. Case studies are really important. Strategies for incorporating GESI and urban resilience, policy responsiveness, financing solutions, NBS and biodiversity with a gender lens. Absolutely, the combination of all of these topics. Great, and this is making me excited to share with you all the subjects of our next dialogues, which I hope will be of interest. Incorporation of Indigenous peoples in the work and policy changes, absolutely. Consideration of NBS and policy design, absolutely. All right, second to last question, how can we improve the next dialogue? What would you like to see? Comment pouvons-nous améliorer le prochain dialogue? Que souhaiteriez-vous voir? So is there anything that maybe we didn't cover that you were left missing, that you thought was missing? Just let us know, and we always try to improve the next one to cover what was potentially missed by the previous one. Zero responses so far. Am I prematurely optimistic that we did everything correctly? There we go. More case studies, experimental learning on NBS, absolutely. Time allocation, focus on the case studies. Diminuer les intervenants en allongeant le temps de présentation, absolument. So this says to reduce interventions from the speakers to allow for better discussion. We always like key takeaways from panelists, make it more interactive, having some Mentimeter discussion during the session. Okay. More time, yes, absolutely. NBS case implementation roadmaps, I believe that says. All right. Great notes, thank you all. And then if there are any other comments or questions, happy to link those to our speakers once again. And connect you with them if there are any final thoughts or questions remaining. All right. I will go ahead and reshare my screen just to cover the next dialogues, since that was something that came up in the Mentimeter. Our next dialogue will be September 24th on coastal resilience and involving NBS with coastal communities. And then kind of touching on our responses, our second to last dialogue of this year will be October 29th on policy and governance for supporting NBS. And then finally, we have a big question of how do we even finance NBS? What are the elements that we need in order to make this happen, make NBS happen and be a reality to be achieved? All right, I want to thank you all and thank you for your patience as I've finished 3 minutes over, but if there are any remaining questions around the topics that we addressed today or around NAbSA or the work that we're doing with the 19 Partnering for Climate projects, please just email me. This is my email, and my colleague, Veronica Reese, who also works on NAbSA with me, with any questions, and we'll be happy to answer. I want to take another opportunity again to thank our speakers for their time and their contributions to this panel. They've been personally very enriching for me. So thank you again for joining us today. And thank you, participants, for your time as well.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
You have a great rest of your day or morning. Thank you all. Thank you, Cesar. Thank you all. Yeah, just answering that last question, Dakota. We will be sharing these. All right, and we'll end.
Bye, guys. Congrats. looking forward to the recordings and the rest of the material. All the best.
Bye now.